Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to be talking about fixed and fluid grids. These are different types of grids that we're going to make in Figma. I'm usually the person that loves to make fluid grids, but definitely fixed grids have their place. So let's jump right in. So as you can see, I'm going to zoom in. You see these little red faint lines over here? If we go in and click our frame, so I've clicked the fixed grid frame, this is where our grid is. This is all the different properties associated with that grid. I'm not going to get into it, but that's why we are going to have these red lines or these columns. Now, how do you see those columns? Because you may not be seeing them in your resource right now. So my shortcut is a Shift and a G. But if you go over here into the zoom and view options, you can see over here is where you're going to find your layout grid view options, and you're going to see the shortcut associated with that. So if you want to easily just toggle them off, which I usually do, go ahead and do that. Let's jump in to the fixed grid. So what is a fixed grid? Basically, the fixed grid has a fixed container width and position. So if we take this grid, this frame, and we start, expanding it a bit, we notice that the actual main container that contains the grid, it doesn't budge at all. So we have all these little grid containers. They're staying fixed based off of the columns here. It actually maintains its exact measurements while the margin, which are these spaces on either side, increases or decreases. So if I go in the opposite direction, it is not going to be responsive. So let's just go back and get it to shrink again. There we go, we're back to normal. So this is really great if you want all your elements to stay proportional, but when you get to larger screens, you may end up with way too much white space on either side, like this. So you may need to think of a different way for your design treatment to not have so much just white space. Let's talk about fluid grids right here on the side. So this is what I usually use. I usually give it a little bit more of a margin on the side here, but let's jump right in. Fluid grids are measured in percentages. So the columns of the grid or your entire grid will shrink or grow depending on the size of your screen. Let me show you what I mean. So as I shrink and grow or expand, and as the frame collapses, the content is going to do the same. Now, if we look at the content right here, we can see you can do this pretty easily by setting the content's constraints. Since this is just a regular frame, I can, make it so that it's, just this amount of columns or the full amount of columns, and then, set it to left and right. Or you can put things in an auto layout frame. These are just little rectangles that I have spaced out here. But if we look into the makeup of this actual grid, we can see that it stretches. So that means it's going to stretch based off of the content. And this one, if we look into there, we will see that it is centered, meaning that it's going to be fixed. Now, one thing that you'll see that is pretty cool here is that if you look at your margins and your gutters, so these are your gutters and these are your margins, if you look at them while I move this grid around, they stay exactly the same. So they are not going to shift. Just the column widths, these little red columns, they're going to shift in size. Now, one con of this approach is that when you are on larger screens and want to utilize all the extra space, sometimes your content may look stretched out. So what I like to do is I like to create several sizes. One for a very large screen that is more, fixed or has a really large margin on either side. So that way we don't get situations like this, because then, content's just not going to look good on a website. So sometimes I'll take this approach for very large screens. And that is the difference between a fixed and a fluid grid.